Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Dave Chesson. Hey, Dave, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me.
I am pleased to have you back. To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Dave Chesson is the guy behind Kindlepreneur.com, a website devoted to teaching authors about book marketing. Recommended by Amazon KDP is a place where you can learn how to optimize marketing for your books. Kindlepreneur has grown to be one of the largest book marketing websites, and I especially like the description code generator. I use that one all the time. Dave's tactics help both fiction and nonfiction authors of all levels get their books discovered by the right readers. Dave is also the creator of Publisher Rocket, a software that helps authors see what's really going on in the book market and thus pick better keywords and categories to help them sell more books. And Dave was a guest back in episode 85, Optimizing Your Keywords. And so the reason that I had asked Dave to join me again on the podcast is I've been listening with interest to all the conversation about how AI is going to change the life of authors. And I haven't heard a lot about the one thing that I really want AI to help me with, which is initially keywords. And so I thought, who would have a finger on the pulse of what's going on with keywords in the author world? And I, of course, thought of Dave. But the response I got back when I asked him about that was a little bit surprising. So, Dave, let's just start on our conversation with you talking a little bit about what you're seeing AI is doing or maybe not doing in terms of keywords.
Yeah. Well, I mean, AI is an idea generator, and unless the program itself has information, it's just going to come up with words that it associates with. And which is definitely, you can think of it as like a muse maybe. But that being said, though, is it's not tapping into Amazon's data in terms of what is selling and what actually converts into a sale. So therefore, it might come up with some neat ideas, but it's not going to be able to come up with concrete things that gives you a really good understanding of, okay, these words make sales. Like, for example, one of the things that we have in Publisher Rocket is, which by the way, we're able to decipher what words end in sales. So an example I like to tell people is that, well, fantasy books, that is a word that lots of people type into Amazon. However, though, that is also a word that does not make a lot of sales. And the reason for that is because if somebody types in the word fantasy books, what are the chances that Amazon's going to send them to the exact kind of fantasy book they want? Usually it's the beginning of a search. So they might type in fantasy books, see that it's not showing what they want, and then they'll add another phrase to it. That phrase will be something like epic, mage, and then they'll look and they'll be like, oh, okay, wait, there's a little bit of romance showing in there. So I need to say something else that, and so they just keep adding words or phrases that helps to call out the books that they don't want and help to bring out the books that they do. And these phrases are the ones that actually end up in the sales. A phrase like Victorian second chance romance with children. It was one of those phrases that when you break down what it means, you could see where the customer was thinking when they typed it in. And you can also probably guess that's going to end up in an absolute sale instead of something that's like romance. And so the biggest thing is that we can start looking at, and this is the way that I look at AI in general, is it's either an assistant or it's a muse. But it's not going to be something that it's not going to replace authors. It's not going to take over the writing. It's more or less like something like I'm finding the best use of AI where I have writer's block or I need a dose of like something really creative. In time, I've gone to ChatGPT and said, my character is right now standing at a sign. He can't read it. And one way looks nice and the other way looks creepy. Come up with some really interesting reason as to why he'd want to choose the creepy path and let me know. And it comes up with some crazy stuff. And I'm like, now I tell authors, definitely don't copy and paste what ChatGPT said. Instead, rewrite it. But you can use it as like a roadblock or when you're trying to be really creative and you can't come up with something. I've really enjoyed it. But will it be able to create an entire chapter? No, it's going to really flounder. Would it be able to write a whole book? No, it's going to flounder. Will it be able to find keywords that are making sales? No, but it can give you some ideas or some paths to start with.
I really like that distinction because I realize as you're talking that what I was thinking is some assistant that would help me suggest words that I hadn't thought of. So, for example, I just started subscribing to the Kindle Trends newsletter from Nat Connor, and one of the things I realized, what I did is I subscribed to the mystery thriller suspense genre one. And one of the things he offers is a word cloud that shows words that are showing up, I think, in the reviews. And I realized that even though my Ann Kinnear's suspense novels have a ghostly element. I don't think I'd actually said the word ghost anywhere in either my description or my keywords. So I was like, oh, yeah, that's a miss. And my shorter term dream is to be able to feed my book into some AI tool and have it suggest to me at least ideas for keywords, and then have myself or a tool like Publisher Rocket refine that based on the additional data it has from Amazon. But it was interesting to me that you went right to another area where AI can help, and that is descriptions. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the big things, and again, it's like the real big theme for everyone is that think of it like an assistant. So I still don't think that AI is going to be able to just come up with your book description. More importantly, the idea of being able to submit your book and then something recreated, it's going to actually be a lot of crunching power. So as it stands, there's really not a good viable way to say, here's my entire book, AI, now come up with a book description. So one of the things that we thought about was, well, how do we help authors improve their descriptions, right? And for a lot of people who don't know, we have a book description generator. And what it is, it's a free tool on Kindlepreneur. You can just type in to Google book description generator, it should show up. But what it is that you put in your book description, and then you can highlight certain sections and make it look the way you want. A lot of people don't know, but you can use HTML coding to make words bigger, bolder, to make there be a line break or more spacing, bullets, those sorts of things, right? Well, like I said, most authors don't know how to HTML code into that. And so what we did was we created what's called a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, right? So you can literally see what your book description is going to look like on Amazon. You can highlight things, turn them in the way you want. When you like it, you click, give me my code, gives you that little patch of code, and you can paste it into Amazon. However, though, we wanted to take this a step further. So everybody's writing in their book description. And when you're starting to, probably in the next week or so, maybe 2 weeks at the most from the point that we're recording this, but what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to put your book description into the generator, and then a button's going to pop up that says, would you like AI to try to improve it? And if you click that, it will show you your original version on the right, and it will show the AI generated one on the left. And what it is it's taking the information that you put into your book description, and it's using a lot of presets and understanding of how Amazon book description should be formed, and it's recreating it. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to take the AI generated one. What you can do is you can look at the one on the left and say, oh, I like that opening sentence, and you can change up the one that you had. Or, oh man, I really love that call to action. That's a good one. And so you can go and just use it as a muse to help improve it. And then you can also do it again. So then once you have your book description that you like, you can copy it, paste it in, hit the AI generator again and see if it can make another version. And this just allows you to constantly polish the cannonball. And so this is, I think, a really prime example of what we should expect AI to be in the future. Is not something that's going to control the full evolution or take over the art or anything like that. But we can start to think of it of like, all right, help me to come up with these things. Help me to figure this out. Hey, how can we improve this? And I think the book description generator is going to be a real fun one for authors, because most authors I've talked about or talked to can like write 100 pages or 100,000 words or whatever in their book and they love it. But the moment that comes to their book description, it's like, and it's one of those scary moments. But now we can at least help them polish that cannonball and get something that's a lot better on the market for them.
Yeah. Inspired by Joanna Penn and her experiments, I put my book descriptions into ChatGPT and said, rewrite this in the style of a best-selling novel. And I did exactly what you're describing. There were like a couple of sentences and I was like, whoa, that's pretty good, and moved them over. And I think it would also be interesting to say, write me the 100-word version of this, write me the 50-word version of this, write me the 200-word version of this, because you might get the pitch, the elevator pitch. You could use ChatGPT to sort of boil down your description to the elevator pitch or expand it to a fuller pitch if that was what you were looking for.
And luckily, using the book description tool, you won't have to think about all those things. We already have it pre-developed. So you just click the button and it knows what to do.
Yep. Another interesting way I use my description is that I put my book description into Midjourney. And I had Midjourney create an image based on my description, and I would never use any of the images Midjourney came up with, although some of them were quite good. Like my book description references that it takes place in Philadelphia. And so they had like a lovely Philadelphia skyline in the background. They were very good. They were not what I was looking for, but they were very good. But what it highlighted for me is that it featured the Philadelphia detective much more prominently on the cover than it did Anne Kinnear, who's actually the protagonist of the series. And I realized that it's because in the description, the detective's name shows up before Anne's name because the detective is the one that gets Anne involved in the case. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because I'm sure that readers could read that, actual human readers could read it and think that the detective plays a bigger role than he actually does. And I'm now probably going to go back, modify it so that his name isn't featured as prominently and his role isn't featured as prominently, and then feed it back into Midjourney and see what Midjourney thinks about that and see if Midjourney portrays the actual protagonist more obviously.
Yeah, that would actually be a very interesting component because one of the things that I find that authors do is they put too many details into their book descriptions and it becomes more a book report.
Yeah.
So if you put your book description has too many details and you put it into like Midjourney and all of a sudden you see this convoluted, chaotic picture of all these things, then you'll know that you had said a little too much. Like generally speaking, one of my rule of thumbs is that try to not mention more than 2 characters in a book description. And the reason for that is that you've got a small space to really talk about it. And if you introduce way too many names, like people lose it. You can allude to a killer or something like that but if you start giving the killer's name and their wife and that they're doing these things, like you're losing. Just call it a dynamic duo, a Bonnie and Clyde of the modern century or something like that. That's much better than, well, Mike John and his wife, Sarah, and don't forget your protagonist. And that's why that's a really good idea that I like it. One thing that I have been enjoying, especially with Midjourney, is creating images inside my book. So I'm not a fan of using Midjourney or so for the cover because I think that a lot of the markets like Amazon are really going to start cracking down on those more. We've seen them actually try to already looking for AI generated covers, but I'm not seeing or hearing that they're looking inside the books for images. So one of the things I've done is that like I've had AI generate a map that I've used for characters. And I've had them also generate some really cool 2-page chapter themes. Right now I'm working on one that's got like a Old Testament component to it. And we used AI to generate what looks like Old Testament images and it looks amazing. And so we made those the chapter themes. And so that could be a lot of fun.
When you created the maps, were you creating maps based on actual places or were you creating completely made up maps? And if the second, how did you prompt Midjourney to create those?
Given statements, like generally I will use so like if it's an island, right? I will call up a specific island. I will tell it's style. So like looking like a Tolkien map and that it's in the general shape of insert island name here. And then generally, though, what I'll try to do is if it's very important that something, like I'll describe it. So there's a point on the map, like we'll call it Cathalo, right? This is the capital, give it a star, have a lake and a river run right down the middle of it and a lake. And what's interesting about that is that I'll try to describe it. And then if there's a problem, I'll have somebody edit it maybe. But truth be told it's like, I'll run with it. Like, okay, there it is. And then I use it for my imagery. So like when I'm writing, one of the things I really love to do too is I have it build character cards as well as settings. So I have images of the character that I can look at while I'm writing, or I can have scenery. Okay, they're going to go into this dark castle in Cthulhu, and the dark castle has these things and gargoyles that are of the 14th century look. And then all of a sudden now I have something I can look at. Sometimes I'll use it in the book, the actual image. Sometimes I won't because it was like, that's not what I'm going for, but it's giving me enough of a start. But yeah, with the map one, you can give like northeast quadrant or on the southernmost point. Otherwise, I just kind of let it flow with some other things and we just roll with it. I do like, by the way, with maps, I do like having extra stuff that won't be talked about. Because what that does, like, for example, if you just have 4 cities you talk about, so you only label 4 cities on the map, your world almost feels less expansive. Whereas if there's other cities and there's roads and things that connect, it makes you feel like there's more to the story, it makes it feel more realistic. So it's like times like that where I really enjoy it just coming up with stuff. I'll say something like mark 8 cities and 4 rivers and 2 mountain ranges, and it will just throw them in there.
That's so cool. It has been a mental jump for me to go from thinking of communications with machines, like talking to SIRI or the other one that starts with an A, as simply as possible, to Midjourney, where more is better. Like when I first started using Midjourney, I tried to keep my prompts as short as possible. Then I watched some instructional videos and I was like, oh, I'm totally going the wrong direction. You can brain dump all sorts of things. But one of the things that I haven't found a way around in Midjourney is that, and this would be true if you were doing maps. Like, let's say you did a map, you got a map you loved, and then the next book comes out and you realize now you want to indicate where the movement of armies across the island or something like that. Is there a way to get the map you like and then tell Midjourney, I want to use this map, but now I want to add this? Or I love this character you've drawn, but now I want to show this character in the woods or on the seaside. Right. The things that you want to keep consistent from image to image.
I think that in the future, we're going to see something. It might not be from Midjourney itself. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw a new service where you can upload one character and tell it, hey, use this person and now move them around in certain ways and give this background. If that hasn't come out, I'd be shocked if it doesn't very soon, because that's the things that I run into that. Now I do have like Photoshop skills myself, so I'll take the map and I'll add the movements or stuff like that. But oh my goodness, wouldn't that be so much easier? And same thing with the character. I would love to say, I love this image. This is my main character. And now have them flying through the air, like with the two swords out and with clouds billowing behind them. And now have him do this. Like that would be so much fun. But no, so far, I don't know of anything like that, but I would be shocked if that doesn't come out in the next like 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, that's so obvious. And just FYI, we're recording this on May 1st, 2023. So who knows what's going to happen on May 2nd, 2023. But the other thing that I really hope they do is that I got a picture I really liked of two of my characters going into a casino, a teenage girl and her godfather's brother. And it was perfect in every way, except Midjourney had made the uncle's hair way too poofy. He looked like a Breck ad or something. So I just wanted to say exactly like that, except without the poofy hair. And I could never figure out how to do that. It was very frustrating.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. They've gotten better with hands, which is good. What's funny is that I had Midjourney design kind of an angel, but specifically because I'd said Old Testament or so, it really pulled some of the cherubim or so from the Bible, which is monstrous. So I was like, oh, okay, well, you're using what I said. Good
yeah,
point.
they're being very
That's not
literal.
what I was thinking, but yep. So we had to change that. Sometimes it goes so literal that it's like, oh, yeah, that's true. That's a lot of eyeballs.
Oh, geez. The one that really surprised me is that I have a new series of books that I'm going to name based on chess moves. And so I wanted a chessboard that had the appropriate pieces based on the title of the book. So in this case, I wanted to show a chessboard that had a queen and a rook of the same color, and then a pawn and king of the other color. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, well, this is going to be simple. I was never able to get it. And even a chessboard, like, I don't know where Midjourney is learning about chessboards, but that's not what they look like. Like in some cases, it would look like a chessboard. In some cases, all the squares would be slightly offset. So it was like a herringbone effect. But it's odd that things that seem like they should be super straightforward, like it does much better the more imaginative you let it be. I'm sorry to be talking about it like it's a person, but I mean, that's almost the kind of thing you just want to go to a traditional stock photo thing and hope that you're going to find a picture of a rook and a queen.
Yeah, the way that AI art works is that it's cataloged as many images as it can come up with, right? And so through the things we've written, the things we posted, it says, okay, great, this is a chessboard, this is a chessboard, this is a marble chessboard, this is a wooden chessboard, this is a Chinese chessboard, this is a 3D chessboard, and this is a medieval chessboard. So it's chronicled all these things. And so when the time comes that we say chessboard, what ends up happening is I know the podcast listeners can't see this, but take your two hands, right? Spread out your fingers. And then what you do is you curve the fingers together, and all of a sudden you're blending all these things. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what it's doing is it won't take one image of something and say, okay, here's the chessboard we're going to use. Instead, it takes like these 50,000 chessboards and blends them in to make a chessboard. And so that's why sometimes, like, especially with solid lines like that, the blending creates this sort of distortion on the lines and rows and things like that, or it creates it because what it wants to do is it wants to create something new, which to an extent is great. That's why it's also going to be really hard for artists to file copyright laws against AI because, yeah, it used your art for inspiration. It used your art and 50,000 other things and hundreds of thousands of data points to come up with this thing that might resemble something you did, but it's not. And so it's the blending of things that causes the problems. That's why fingers were so problematic. Now, granted, they're starting to put logic in there that says only 5 on a hand, unless they say otherwise.
Unless someone specifies, yeah.
Right. And so they're starting to learn where those things come. Maybe it's also in the future, maybe they'll realize, oh, chessboards, because they're solid lines, we can't distort them or ship them. They have to be perfect. I can see some logic code coming in the future, but for the time being, just think of that blending, taking the fingers and weaving them all together. And all of a sudden you have a hand, but you have many things come together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it. Just a quick break from the interview. Are you getting value from the podcast? Please consider supporting it and all the work I do at the Indy Author by becoming a patron. To pledge a monthly contribution, go to patreon.com/the Indy Author, or to make an occasional contribution, perhaps to indicate the value that a specific episode or resource provided to you on your creative voyage, scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. And now, back to the interview. I'm going to step back from the image-centric part a little bit and just talk a little bit about categories, because as with keywords, categories is something that I would love to be able to just basically plug my book into it. This is my goal. Plug my entire text into it and have somebody else tell me what categories it should be in. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, that already exists.
And what would it be called?
Well, Publisher Rocket has that.
Yeah.
So what would happen is that when you go into Publisher Rocket, you can either do a competition search. Okay, so just type in, say, the name of your book, or you can also type in just sort of what kind of book you are. And then once you've done that, there is a button on the top right called Unleash the Categories. And that will now list out every category that every book on that page is a part of. So now you can see all the categories that other books like your book are attached to, or that Amazon thought that they should be attached to. And the cool part is it will also tell you how many sales a day you need to make in order to be a bestseller right there. The other thing too is that we have a new feature that came out called Historical Category Feature. So if you go into the category feature on Publisher Rocket and you find one of the categories that you're interested in, or you think that is a good fit, you can click on the Analyze button and it brings up the historical value. So you can see sales trends. You can also see the average price for self-published book, average price for published book. But the most important part is there's a little button there that you can click and it will list all the categories that our system believes is close to this one. So like, say, for example, you choose sci-fi military, okay? Under science fiction and fantasy, science fiction, sci-fi military, that's the string. You can click to see more categories and it will find not only a bunch in science fiction fantasy, but it will also find all of the science fiction, sci-fi military that's listed in literary fiction, in YA. It will find tertiary ones that aren't just sci-fi, but like alien invasion, bombardment, and a whole bunch of others. And so those are two really great ways to find what would work or what should work. So if you've identified one that's the perfect category, then you can find that list there on historical categories that will list every category that is associated. Or you could also look at your competitors or other books that are about it, and it will show you all of the categories that those are a part of as well.
I think that the leap I'm hoping to have computers take care of for us is even that very first assessment. So I think this is especially true for new authors, but it's still true for me, even having 9 novels under my belt, that you get done with a book and you think, oh, this is a traditional cozy. I've written a traditional cozy. And so you go into tools like Publisher Rocket with that preconceived idea that what you're doing is you're drilling down into the traditional cozy area to find something more specific that's going to lead to the sale like you had described. But I think that AI could really be helpful in avoiding premeditated bias in terms of what you think your book is, because you might feed your book into an AI and it says, oh, I noticed that on page 37, you have this really graphic description of the murder. That's not a traditional cozy. You've written a thriller. Surprise. Do you see that kind of functionality coming along?
Well, like I said earlier, the amount of power to crunch an entire book is going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
So the idea of putting your book into a system that's going to have to analyze over 100,000 words and then come out with something, right now, I don't think the technology is good enough to be able to do that on such a large scale. I think if it did, it would probably be very expensive just because it's funny is ChatGPT, you can't just throw like 100,000 words into it for something. And on top of that too, if you use an API, which is where you actually have to pay for it, I can't imagine, but it'd probably be many, many dollars to be able to have it crunch that. The problem with it is right now, we're not seeing the ability to see that much to come up with a good idea in that respect. First off, one would have to feed in every category on Amazon, and there's like over 13,000 of them, into ChatGPT and say, hey, which ones would this work with? Second off, you'd have to put in the whole book in there for it to crunch and then compare to the 13,000 to come up with. And while the systems can do that, it's just going to be a very expensive operation. Then the final issue with that is that, like we've seen with things like fingers or with art or kind of things where it just goes off on left field, or it also, that's one of the things too I tell people that do like nonfiction is, hey, you really need to check all of the information you have in there because it can go off on a pen. And next thing you know, Thomas Edison was the creator of the radio. You know, it's like, no, he was associated with Tesla, but also too, it won't know the fact that Tesla wasn't named the creator until later. Like it will make all these mistakes. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, Edison is the creator of the radio, even though really it's between Marconi or Tesla, and it loses these things. And so what I would be worried about is that the system could come back and say, hey, congratulations, you have a thriller. Surprise. And all it did was it focused on one thing and went down a route, and it totally could spit out something that's might be literal, but they missed the point. Another thing that I would find it having problem too is analyzing humor. Like it can come up with humor because it knows, but it has a problem of registering it. So I see a lot of potential problems on certain areas. Humor, which by the way, anybody who ever learns language, one of the old caveats is you can't say you truly know the culture until you actually find their humor funny. It's one of those things that I've learned is like, I've gone in and I've sat there. I was a Chinese specialist and they start saying things and everybody's laughing. I have no idea. I'm like, what? You just said he killed a cat. That doesn't make sense. Why are we laughing? But then of course I'll be sitting there watching it with the translators, watching a American sitcom, and I'm laughing and the translators are like, what? What's wrong with you? I'm like, and so I feel like AI is going to have a hard time registering. It can come up with it because it's like, oh, okay, you want a joke? We have a whole giant list of jokes. We'll put it in. But when somebody says a joke, it's going to miss it. So I fear that, so kind of recap on that. I think it's going to be expensive just to be able to crunch all that data for you. Like, so read my book, go through this list, tell me which ones. The second thing is I think it's going to miss a lot of things, and it could lead you down the wrong path because it's, as we're talking about, there are a lot of paths that it can't figure out. And so, but that being said, though, is I think that there's going to be a lot more suggestions or a lot more assistance in the future. Like we talked about with book descriptions, maybe not so much writing one, but more or less taking what you have and improving it, taking the ideas you have and improving it. I think these are all very good opportunities for what we look for in the future. Same thing with the grammar checkers. I bet Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly right now are really working with AI to try to find ways to add more beyond just the rules themselves. They've got to worry a little bit about the cost, though, because with the moment that you start adding in AI, you increase the operational costs of it. But I just think it's going to be an interesting thing.
Well, I also think that a lot of those features, like even Microsoft Word, grammar checker and spell checker has gotten much more sophisticated in the last year. It's more aware of the context in which a word is used, not just, oh, yeah, sure, TOO is a word, so I'm going to assume it's fine. Now it's understanding that TOO in that context is not the word you want. And so I would be, if I were part of those organizations, I'd be concerned that pretty soon it will become old-fashioned to have another layer of that you purchase in order to overlay what's just built into your word processor.
Yeah.
And I do hope that over time, and I mean, this might not be for years and years, but I do hope that over time, somebody's also working on the processing side. So that idea of loading even more data, loading around 100,000 words won't become cost prohibitive as I think you're absolutely right. It would be now.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll see something happen like that. I think, like I said, it's right. I think a lot of the way we operate is going to change, kind of like in 1996 when the internet was really starting picking up. A lot of people said, well, nobody's ever going to buy shoes online. Oh, yeah. Or, hey, people are going to do this, or people won't put their credit card into it. I think kind of running into this thing with AI where I think it's going to change the way we search for things. I wouldn't be surprised if really Alexa and Siri start actually becoming useful. Imagine just being like, hey, Siri, I don't know how to end this chapter. Oh, here's an idea. And we just start really seeing things come alive. I think that also will improve on our research, how we learn. So I think there's a lot of advancements coming, and I think it's really cool. And notice again, like, whereas a lot of people, especially, I just came back from a conference, and the number one question I asked was, is AI going to replace authors? And I'm like, I don't see that happening at all. But what I do see is I see authors using it as more of an assistant and muse to more effectively and efficiently do things. Just as we grow into the industry, there's going to be some pitfalls. There's going to be some things to be aware of. There's going to be tactics, like you said, too, like when you were doing Midjourney, right? And you started with, let me be short and to the point. And then you realize, oh no, I need to micromanage this thing. Like just spew it all out there and let it figure it out and get better results. And I think we're just going to learn those things. One of the things that we're trying to do, we have a new system coming online this week, actually, on Publisher Rocket, where for the past 8 months, we have been collecting data on Amazon itself, right? So we have gathered terabytes of some of the best keyword phrases out there. And one of the things that we're doing is we're creating an algorithm, and which is kind of funny. It's sometimes people use the word AI when it might just be an algorithm, and sometimes an algorithm for AI. I'm going to say this is an algorithm, not AI itself, but by the marketing definition, people would say AI. But our algorithm, though, is starting to figure out that, hey, when people put in their initial keyword phrase, here's a kind of a spider web of all these other phrases and uses of the word and not synonyms of it, that we have a database where we know these are really good. So let's just put those in there to see, to give the author more options, more understanding. And it might show them things that really are connected to their phrase, but they definitely wouldn't have thought of. And I think like these kind of assistants, this machine learning and forecasting and networking components, I think are really going to make things even better, suggestive, more improvements. But it's going to be a fun time, man. Man, I can't even imagine what it's going to look like 5 years from now.
Yeah. Well, to close out our conversation, I wanted to talk about one more piece of metadata, which I think for me, has already made a big difference, and that is book titles. So I theme all my book titles. So the Yankee Near Suspense novels are all Shakespeare quotes. The Lizzie Ballard thrillers are all names of children's games. And I spent a lot of time with my giant Oxford University book of Shakespeare looking for quotes to use. And when I got ChatGPT, I plugged in, give me the name of 20 suspense novel titles that are based on Shakespeare quotes. And
nice.
It came up with some pretty good ones. And so I think it's a great brainstorming thing. I've also had great luck with nonfiction, plugging in what the topic of a book is and asking ChatGPT in this case to suggest titles for me. What are your thoughts about what AI can do for authors in terms of titling or even subtitling their books?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, it's a great aid. It's a great tool. There's pen name generators out there. There's character name generators. But now those are like pre-developed lists. Go to ChatGPT and, hey, I'm describing my character. Oh, and what name should I give them? Or I love that idea about the fact of instead of you having to physically try to look and read and think of these things, have it generate, or even something that sounds like. So yeah, like I said, this is the thing that I love most about AI is when we're using it to either more efficiently find the information we want. So now you're not having to scour for it. And at the same time, too, I found some very, very unique, especially like you said, too, I love the nonfiction component. It really has come up with some incredible terms. It was funny. There used to be it was a blog post title generator, and you could put in like what your title was going to be. And then there were some selections you can make about whether you want to be funny, and it just knew how to turn it into, and I hate to use the term, but it's a good term, clickbait, as in like it was mic drop moment titles, and every time I went to it, I always would use it. And I was like, wow, I didn't use a lot of them because it was like, okay, that's a little too much for me. But every time I was like, that's unique. That's crazy. That's good. And I never saw the same thing over again. And it's funny, this was like 3 or 4 years ago. And now everybody has that power to do it, to put in a blog post or to put in a title or to put in a funny situation. But yeah, I really love the idea of using it as an idea generator, a muse, an assistant. And I think these are the best things that come about it.
Well, you're reminding me that I really need to do that for titling podcast episodes because I'm woefully bad at making them intriguing. And so I'm going to put in the description of what our conversation is. And if people go to the show notes after they listen to this, I'll include some of the suggestions that AI makes in terms of titling the episode.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. That one it's just like titling the book. You can even keep a theme, or you can even make it work hard and make it rhyme or whatever. It's a lot of fun.
Great. Well, Dave, thank you so much for coming on and talking about what's available now and what you see coming down the pike. Please let the listeners and viewers know where they can go to find out more about you and all you do online.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back. If you go to kindlepreneur.com, that's like Kindle Entrepreneur, kindlepreneur.com. Scroll to the bottom, there's a contact link. And if you have any questions about anything we talked about or want clarification, hit me up there. I still respond to every one of them.
Great. Thank you so much.